Headlights carved a silver ribbon through the Texas dark. Margaret's phone glowed on the dash, a voicemail repeating, "Your father's not well," the nurse had said, voice careful. 50 years behind her, 30 away from Willow Creek. The road ahead answered with a sound like holding breath. She told herself she was only driving to think. Dallas still hummed in the rear view, suits and deadlines, but the word father kept knocking on old doors. Under the engine's drone, a lullaby she pretended to forget. The past road shotgun, quiet and uninvited. Exit signs flickered like choices she'd postponed. She rehearsed arguments, crisp as legal briefs. Reasons to turn back formed, then fell apart. A different voice rose, softer and stubborn. "You left, but you never really left," it said. She remembered the day she swore never to return. A suitcase, a scholarship, a house with shutting windows, her mother's piano silent as a held breath, her father's shadow long across the doorway. A promise made to survive, not to heal. Rain began, first polite, then insistent drumming. Wipers traced ellipses over a restless sky. Every mile felt like sanding down a scar. She gripped the wheel until her knuckles confessed. The voicemail replayed, asking for an answer. An empty gas station appeared like a small stage. She filled the tank and stared at her reflection. Lines she earned, lines she avoided reading. She pressed call, voice steadier than her pulse. "I'm coming," she said, then believed it. Back on the highway, dawn reddened the horizon. Cattle fences sketched ribs across the fields. The silence between them grew, but changed shape. It felt less like a wall, more like a bridge. And bridges are made to be crossed. The sign read Willow Creek, paint-chipped and stubborn. Main Street yawned awake with a sleepy pride. She drove past stores that remembered her shoes. Dust rose like applause from forgotten seats. Every porch light seemed to blink her name. The lane to the farmhouse narrowed with weeds. Crickets stitched the heat into a rough blanket. There it was, the house that kept their secrets. Windows blinking old stories, roof tired but standing. The rusted gate sagged like a sigh finally spoken. She lifted the latch. It squealed like a memory. Her heartbeat stumbled, then found its pace. Bootsteps on gravel echoed years she skipped. The door opened before she could knock. Her father stood there, thinner, iron still in his eyes. "Margaret," he said, as if testing the weight. She swallowed 3 decades in a single breath. Up close, time had written in a shakier hand. His posture fought for authority. Lost to age, they stood between porch light and daylight, unsure. "I'll put the kettle on," she offered, neutral ground. He nodded, moved slower than she remembered. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and absence. Photographs lined the hall like jurors watching. The floor creaked, a language she once spoke. She found 2 cups, mismatched, stubborn survivors. Steam rose, fogging the space between them gently. They weathered small talk like careful sailors. Names of neighbors, rain, the roof that leaks, words that hide what matters. For now, he glanced at the driveway, then back to her. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, almost soft. "I didn't either," she admitted, almost brave. Something fragile shifted, not yet named. The kettle clicked again, like a second chance. She climbed the stairs to her old room slowly. Dust motes danced in a thick shaft of light. Posters gone, but the nail holes remembered tunes. A quilt folded itself into a familiar hush. The girl she was stood in the doorway, listening. In the closet, a tin box waited like a held breath. Inside, snapshots curled at the edges, sun-kissed, her mother's handwriting looped across postcards. A school ribbon, untied but still proud. The discarded map of a first life. Down the hall, the piano wore a pale sheet. She pulled it back. Wood gleamed like wet earth. Keys blinked up as if woken from a spell. When she pressed one, the note felt patient, a sound that remembered her better than she did. Her father lingered in the doorway, not entering. The note hovered between them, a simple bridge. She waited for blame, and found silence instead. He folded his arms, then unfolded again. "Your mother loved that song," he murmured. Margaret let her fingers find the melody slowly. It broke once, then knit itself together. The house exhaled, boards easing into rhythm. A scent of lemon oil rose, clean and old. She played like someone writing a letter. The last chord hung longer than expected. Her father set a photograph on the lid. 3 faces in Sunday clothes, sun in their eyes. The edges had softened, the feeling had not. They looked, each seeing a different truth. He cleared his throat as if to speak. Words formed, then retreated behind caution. "Dinner at 6, he said, retreating toward habit. She nodded, retreating toward strength she needed. The piano kept the conversation alive. The diner smelled like cinnamon and second chances. Chrome trim held the morning like a bright secret. Margaret slid into a booth that remembered elbows. A bell chimed, and the room turned a little. Small towns here, footsteps the way radios hear storms. Margaret Lane, a voice asked, equal parts question and joy. Lydia appeared, same smile, new streaks of silver. They hugged like a bridge rebuilt in one motion. Girl, Dallas couldn't keep you forever, Lydia teased. Apparently not, Margaret said, softer than before. They traded quick stories between coffee refills, career victories that sounded smaller here. Lydia's twins, a bake sale, a broken porch step, a map of ordinary miracles, plainly drawn. Margaret felt something unclench in her chest. Then Lydia's tone bent toward careful terrain. Tom Carter's still around, she said, watching. Widower now, runs the garage by the creek. He asks about you when he forgets not to. The cup warmed Margaret's hands, not her calm. Outside, a pickup rumbled past like a memory. She pictured Tom's laugh, the way it tilted rooms, the last argument, the scholarship, the slammed door. How love sometimes hides inside ambition's coat. How coats get heavy when winters are long. Lydia slid a napkin across, a neat handwriting map. Come to the market Sunday, she invited gently. People would love to see you back. Maybe the town needed proof that returns happen. Maybe she needed it more than they did. As Margaret paid, the bell chimed again. She glanced at the street, at the creek beyond. Wind rippled the water like a half-remembered song. Her reflection blurred, then steadied in the glass. Somewhere, a wrench clinked against metal. The garage door was open to the afternoon light. Oil, cedar, and rain smelled like a working hymn. Tom stood with his back turned, shoulders familiar. He looked up at a sound only he could hear. Recognition moved across his face, quiet and sure. Margaret, he said, wiping hands on a rag. Her name in his voice felt like finding a key. Not an apology, not an accusation, just truth. Years gathered, then politely stepped aside. They stood in the doorway of what-ifs. They spoke about ordinary things first. The storm season, the stubborn carburetor, the bridge. Words that sharpened enough to cut distance. He asked about Dallas. She gave headlines. He nodded, reading margins. She didn't say your father never stopped checking the porch, Tom said, not blaming, just laying a card on the table. Something softened and ached at the same time. She pictured Harold, evening after evening, waiting. Some doors closed loudly, some close by staying open. A schoolboy ran in with a rattling bike chain. Tom fixed it with patient hands and easy talk. Margaret watched the small redemption take shape. The boy rode off, grinning into the sun. Hope, it seemed, liked to work in overalls. Tom glanced at her, then the road toward the farm. If you need a hand with repairs, I'll come by. No pressure, just a lantern set near dusk. She nodded, a thanks, balanced between ribs. The afternoon settled like dust after rain. Driving back, she rehearsed new questions carefully. What she wanted from the town, from herself, from time. The gate appeared, still rusted, still willing. She pushed it open and stepped through anyway. Somewhere inside, a kettle began to sing. The morning began with the sound of dishes clattering. Margaret burned the eggs, cursed under her breath, laughed. From the next room, her father coughed, sharp and hollow. Smells like you're winning the kitchen war, he muttered. It was the closest thing to a peace offering. They ate in silence, each guarding their portion of pride. He criticized the coffee. She corrected his salt habit. Beneath the words lived something brittle, but alive. The air crackled like a storm building in the walls. Sometimes, love sounded exactly like argument. The first real fight came over the roof repairs. She wanted to hire help. He insisted on doing it himself. Old anger rose like dust in sunlight, choking the room. You always thought I couldn't handle anything, she cried. You always had to prove you could. He snapped. A chair tipped, the screen door slammed, and time rewound. Margaret stepped into the yard, trembling with rage. The fields were gold and endless, uncaring of pride. She kicked at a loose stone, hard enough to sting. The sound echoed like applause for no one. Minutes later, a crash split the silence open. She turned to see her father sprawled near the porch. The latter lay beside him, metal against bone. She ran, heart in her throat, breath in pieces. Dad, please don't move, she begged. He grimaced, stubborn even in pain. I'm fine, he lied, voice thin as paper. Margaret helped him up, trembling hands steadying his frame. For a second, His weight rested fully on her. Something ancient softened, quiet as mercy. That night, she sat by his bed while he slept. The lamp hummed. The clock ticked like forgiveness. His hand, scarred and strong, lay open on the blanket. She thought of all the things they had broken. Some could still be mended, she realized. Morning light spilled across the living room floor. Dust shimmered, turning stillness into something sacred. Margaret stood before the piano, untouched for years. Her fingers hovered, uncertain, above the keys. One deep breath, and then a note. Fragile, true. The melody came slowly, from muscle and memory. Her mother's song, once forbidden by silence. The walls leaned in, listening with patient hearts. Margaret's voice hummed low, half lullaby. Music filled the house like an apology without words. From the hallway, her father appeared, unsteady but awake. He didn't speak, just leaned against the doorframe. His eyes glistened with something raw and unguarded. For a heartbeat, the years between them disappeared. They were only two souls caught in the same ache. When the final chord faded, no one moved. The quiet afterward felt full, not empty. Harold stepped closer, touched the piano lid softly. "She used to play that when it rained," he said. His voice cracked in the middle of her name. Margaret smiled through tears she didn't plan. "I remember," she whispered. "Hand over the keys." He nodded, a man remembering how to nod. The house, once heavy, now seemed to breathe again. A bridge rebuilt in the language of sound. Later, she found him on the porch, eyes closed. The sun caught the silver in his hair like grace. "Thank you for the song," he said without looking. She sat beside him, no reply needed. Sometimes presence says everything. Inside, the piano stayed uncovered for good. Wind moved through the curtains like applause. Margaret traced a finger over the polished wood. For the first time, the house felt less haunted, and her heart less alone. The town square pulsed with weekend chatter. Lemonade stands, laughter, fiddles on corners. Margaret wandered through it, a visitor turned local. People waved, some shy, some surprised. Willow Creek was remembering her gently. She stopped at Lydia's booth for peach preserves. "Didn't expect to see you smiling," her friend teased. Margaret laughed, almost blushing at the truth. "I guess I'm remembering how," she said. The words tasted new, like the fruit. Tom appeared, carrying a box of tools. "Your roof's not done lying to you," he joked. She smiled, not defensive, not distant. Together, they lifted crates, easy in rhythm. It felt like breathing in sync again. The sheriff's band played an old country tune. Children danced, parents swayed, dust rose gold. Margaret clapped along, forgetting her posture. For the first time, she didn't feel observed. She simply belonged. Afterward, she and Tom walked by the creek. He talked about his late wife, soft and honest. Margaret listened, not as a savior, but a soul. Lost spoke its own dialect. She understood. The silence that followed was comfortable. At sunset, they returned to their cars slowly. "See you around," he asked, hope well disguised. "Probably sooner than you think," she said. He grinned, tipped his hat, drove away. Her pulse lingered, light as the wind. That night, she wrote in her old journal. 3 words filled the page. "I am staying." The ink bled softly, a promise forming. Outside, cicadas stitched the dark together. Willow Creek sang her back to life. Harold sat by the window, pale but alert. The light carved careful shapes across his hands. "Margaret," he said, voice low as worn paper, "there's something you should know about your mother." Her heart stilled, waiting for ghosts. "She didn't die in childbirth," he began slowly. "She fought a sickness we didn't talk about." He paused, eyes searching hers for understanding. "Depression," he said, the word trembling free. She slipped away when the silence got too loud. Margaret's breath caught, the world tilting. Her memories rewound, colored differently now. The hush, the pity, the half-told stories, every unanswered question finally found its shape, and compassion bloomed where anger once lived. "She wanted to get better," Harold whispered. "I thought protecting you meant hiding the truth." Tears rolled without ceremony down his face. Margaret knelt beside him, took his hand gently. "You did your best," she said, and meant it. The air between them shifted, no longer sharp. Two people, carrying the same wound, side by side, no fixing, just witnessing. And that was enough. Forgiveness entered quietly, like dawn through curtains. Her mother's song echoed faintly from another room. They sat there until shadows lengthened. The silence turned from burden to prayer. Harold's breathing slowed, his shoulders easing. Margaret felt something settle deep and still. Love had finally learned to speak. That night, She opened the window to the fields. Fireflies drifted, blinking like quiet souls. The truth had hurt, but also healed. Sometimes freedom is born from confession, and sometimes from simply listening. The first thunder rolled in like an old truck. Wind bent the trees, rain tasting of metal. Margaret rushed to close the shutters upstairs. Below, Harold called out, voice thin and shaking. Lightning tore the sky, white and merciless. The roof groaned, old wood meeting its match. She ran for buckets, heart drumming in panic. Tom appeared at the porch, drenched and determined. I saw the lights, figured you'd need help. Together they battled leaks and wind and memory. A crack like gunfire split the ceiling beam. Water poured through, cold and wild. They dragged Harold to safety near the hearth. He resisted, stubborn, even in danger. Let me stand, he gasped, pride refusing rest. Please, Dad, don't, Margaret cried above the storm. He stumbled. She caught him, refusing to yield. Tom held the ladder steady as the house trembled. Boards snapped. The past seemed to scream. Still, she would not let go. Minutes blurred into thunder and breath. Then, silence, heavy and holy. The worst had passed. The roof barely holding. Margaret pressed her forehead to Harold's shoulder. He whispered, "You've got her strength, you know." Outside, the storm limped away across the fields. Rain softened to a hush of gratitude. Tom rested his hands on his knees, exhausted. She met his eyes and nodded once, deeply. They had survived more than weather. When dawn came, light spilled through broken slats. Margaret looked around at what remained standing. Not much, but enough to rebuild. She touched her father's hand, still warm, still here, and the house exhaled, like it had waited for that moment. The sun broke over Willow Creek like forgiveness made visible. Roofs glistened, fences leaned into new beginnings. Margaret carried boxes of blankets and nails, organizing helpers. Children laughed where thunder once shouted. The air smelled of mud and hope drying fast. Tom arrived with lumber, and that easy grin. They worked side by side, no words wasted. Her sleeves rolled, his hands steady, rhythm finding them again. He told a joke about the roof being jealous of the piano. She laughed, surprised by the sound in her own mouth. Neighbors came with hammers and soup pots. Every gesture stitched the town back together. Margaret led, quiet but sure, her strength borrowed from yesterday's storm. Even the air seemed to hum a different song. The house began to look less like sorrow, more like story. At dusk, she and Tom fixed the last shutter. The silence between them felt earned, not empty. He handed her a cup of coffee, steaming like peace. "Guess we're both still standing," he said softly. She nodded, still standing, still learning. Inside, Harold watched through the window, his eyes tired but shining with something tender. He saw not the child who left, but the woman who returned, the one who could build, forgive, stay. He smiled, small and eternal, and turned off the lamp. The night settled slow and kind. Cicadas sang like old friends reunited. Margaret sat on the porch, boots muddy, heart clean. The moon rested easy above the repaired roof. Tomorrow, she thought, would taste of dawn. The morning came soft, the air almost hesitant. Harold's cough broke the quiet like a question. Margaret brought tea, careful not to spill. He was weaker now, skin paper thin, eyes distant. "Sit," he said, his voice more breath than sound. "I wasn't good at this," he began slowly. Being a father, loving loud enough, forgiving, quick. Each word seemed to cost him something. She reached for his hand, smaller than memory. "I know," she whispered, "and I wasn't good at staying." They talked about things that no longer needed defense. The piano, the scholarship, the silence between birthdays. He told her he watched her interviews online, proud and hidden, that every win of hers felt like redemption for him too. Tears came easy now, not from weakness but release. "Your mother would be proud," he murmured, "of you, and maybe, finally, of me." Margaret pressed his hand to her cheek. The years folded into that touch, all of them forgiven. "I love you, Doth," she said. No hesitation left. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening at the edges. "Then I did something right," he managed. The window framed the late afternoon light. Dust floated like tiny prayers unspoken. They sat in the warmth until words ran out. When she stood to adjust his blanket, he sighed. It was deep, final, peaceful. A surrender without fear. His chest stilled, but the room stayed full. Margaret froze, then leaned down, forehead to his. "Rest now," she whispered. "You can let go." Outside, the wind passed gently through the trees. The house made no protest, only a long, quiet breath. The piano lid lifted slightly in the draft. One single key pressed itself, soft as goodbye. The note lingered and would not fade. 3 days later, the morning felt both strange and familiar. Margaret opened drawers, sorting what was left. Among folded shirts, a sealed envelope waited patiently, her name in his careful handwriting for after. Her pulse stumbled once, then steadied. She sat by the window before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and age. His words were simple, unadorned, painfully honest. He spoke of regret, of pride too heavy to show, of love that had always existed, just poorly translated. He wrote that he'd restored her mother's piano in secret. "Thought you might need it more than I do," the letter said. He told her he followed every case she won, every speech she gave, that even from afar, he'd never stopped believing in her. "I wanted to be a man worth your forgiveness," he ended. Margaret let the letter fall to her lap, breath uneven, grief and gratitude braided together in her chest. Tears came again, but softer this time, not for what was lost, but for what had been found. The silence felt less empty, more sacred. She walked to the piano, fingers trembling, ran them over the keys, each one a memory. The wood gleamed like something newly alive. She played, not the old melody, but a new one her father would have understood. When the final notes settled, so did her heart. The house no longer echoed, it answered. She looked toward the fields beyond the glass. They shimmered like promises, not yet named, and she knew it was time to stay. Morning light spilled through open windows. The scent of coffee mingled with fresh paint and earth. Margaret stood at the gate, a sign newly hung, Willow Creek Inn. Travelers would come soon, she thought, hearts carrying their own storms. This house was ready to shelter them. Tom arrived early, toolbox in hand, smile in his eyes. He fixed a loose hinge while she planted lavender by the porch. Their movements synchronized like a quiet dance. Work became laughter, and laughter became ease. Some beginnings bloom from what once broke. Guests started coming, each with a story. A young mother escaping city noise, an artist chasing light. Margaret listened, guided, healed in small ways. The land gave back more than it took. Evening fires turned strangers into family. At night, she played piano in the parlor. Notes drifted into the halls like warm wind. Tom would hum from the kitchen, off-key but brave. Their laughter-filled corners where silence once lived. The house, at last, had a heartbeat. Sometimes she'd pause and look outside. Fireflies stitched gold threads between trees. She thought of her father, the letter, the peace. Everything lost had become something learned. Everything learned had turned into love. When the first harvest came, the fields shimmered. Neighbors gathered, the town alive again. Margaret stood by the fence, hands dusted with soil. Tom squeezed her shoulder, steady and sure. "This place feels like home," he said. She smiled, eyes soft with knowing. "It finally is," she replied. The stars rose early, bright and unashamed. The farm exhaled, alive, rooted, whole. So did she. The autumn morning opened with a golden hush. Leaves turned copper, whispering farewells along the road. Margaret packed a small bag, not to leave, just to remember. The old truck started with its familiar cough. She smiled at the sound of staying. The road curved through cotton fields and memory, every mile a mirror, every fence post a witness. She saw her younger self in the passing glass, the girl who fled, the woman who returned. Both waved at each other in peace. Tom had offered to come, but she'd wanted solitude. Some journeys finish best in silence. The same road that once felt like escape now felt like prayer. Wind rushed through the windows like laughter. She breathed it in, steady and free. At the old bridge, she stopped the truck. The river glimmered, calm and endless. Here was where she'd promised never to come back. Now it felt like she'd never really left. Love, she realized, had always been patient. She whispered thanks, for storms, for roots, for roads, for the father who taught her how to stay strong by leaving, for the man who showed her gentleness without demand, for the woman she'd finally become. Her reflection in the water nodded back. The sun climbed, slow and sure behind her. Willow Creek waited, humming like a lullaby. Every ending was just a doorway left open. She turned the truck toward home, and the horizon ahead was full of promise.